Awareness, the final frontier. These are the explorations of Jonathan Robinson and Brian Tom O'Connor. Their continuing mission, to discover fresh new paths to the mystery within, to seek out new joys and new methods of awakening, to boldly go into the heart of expanded consciousness. This is Awareness Explorers.
Well, welcome, fellow explorers, and thank you for being a fellow explorer. I am Jonathan Robinson, and I'm with my co-host,
Brian Tom O'Connor.
So if you are familiar with our podcast, you know that sometimes we interview fellow explorers that are well known for being explorers, basically spiritual teachers. And last time we talked to a man named Stuart Schwartz, and we won't spend a lot of time reviewing what we talked about there, but one of the subjects Stuart brought up and what he is really known for as a teacher is leading these things that are called Satsang. Or Brian, why don't you come up with how you say Satsang?
Well, I say Satsang, but I'm not sure which is correct. So
Right.
We can either do Satsang or Satsang and see. I know that La Kelly likes to talk about cat sang because what you can learn from your cat and how it
Yes.
watches things.
Well, however you pronounce it, there's also different versions of this powerful tool, which, as far as I know, has been around for thousands of years. And it came to my attention that not everybody knows about this tool and knows about what it is. And in fact, a lot of times people use the same word to describe different things. So we thought that we would explore what satsang is, how one can make use of it, what it isn't, and maybe how it can impact your spiritual life. And what I liked about what Stuart said is that he kind of defined it for himself. Now, the way Stuart was doing it is he was the teacher and he was giving satsang to a bunch of students in usually a small group. But one of the things he mentioned is that it doesn't have an agenda. It has more of an intention. And, when we normally go to listen to somebody, there's kind of a beginning, a middle, and an end, and there's a clear-cut agenda. But satsang is often defined as association of truth, or the association of seekers seeking truth, or something like that, which means that it's not trying to come up with intellectual information, but more of a intention to know truth and join together so that we can explore in those realms together. That's my hit on it for a quick definition, but I'm wondering what yours would be, Brian.
Oh, I think that's exactly right. It's made up of two words, Sat, which means truth or goodness, and Sang, which means gathering or association. So association in truth or gathering in truth or gathering in goodness are all possible definitions. But usually what happens is people get together with a teacher, and the teacher will give a talk. Often there's a lot of sitting in silence, and there are questions and answers, at least in the versions that I've seen. Now, I know that in more orthodox versions of Hinduism, satsang may be much more of a formal thing. And that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about more of the modern American version, at least the ones that I've been to.
Mm-hmm. Now, I was with a spiritual teacher and group for 25 years that would have a weekly satsang, and our version was sometimes a little bit different. One of the things that would happen is about every other week, the teacher would give a satsang, which would often last 45 minutes to an hour, and then he'd have question and answers. But every other week was him choosing 2 or 3 people from our group to give satsang. And what was interesting about that was that you never knew if you were going to be chosen. So you would hear your name called, and you would go up in front of a group of about 50 or 60 people, and you would talk for half an hour spontaneously, which can be nerve-wracking the first time you do it because you don't have anything prepared. And if you do have something prepared, it sounds prepared, which is not what you're trying to do. You're trying to really speak from your heart about important subjects, truth or what's going on with you or what you're learning. And I was always amazed at how good it was. Not just when I talked, which I'm a little bit less impartial about, but there'd be somebody going up who I thought was a complete bozo. I'm going, oh God, I don't want to listen to Fred, and then Fred would pour out his heart, and it would be so inspiring to see this aspect of that person and to have them touch you in a way that doesn't happen in normal conversational dialogue. Have you had that experience as well, where somebody gives satsang and it just kind of blows you away? You don't know how they did it?
I certainly have experienced that, although I haven't experienced what you described as one of the members other than the teacher being called upon to give a talk. In fact, I would love to experience that sometime. But I have experienced many times a teacher who sits down and maybe they have a topic and that's about it. And maybe even not. And they just speak. And they speak for a long time. And it's truthful, it's inspiring, it's direct, it's interesting. And I'm really quite amazed at how they do it. And many of them say they are speaking from awareness when they do that. They're speaking from what Stewart calls the self, which is the universal self, what's looking out through all of our eyes, and then just speaking from there. And Locke Kelly in his meetings encourages people to speak from there without planning what they're going to say. And people do, although it's usually just short little bits going around the room as opposed to one person holding forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty magical. It's like you tap into a wellspring of diamonds, and whether you're speaking from what we might call awareness, or you could say, this is a slightly different experience, but you're speaking from your heart. I was hearing one teacher describe it as he puts lips on his heart and lets his heart talk.
That's a wonderful image.
Yeah. So there's different ways to do it. Speaking from your heart, speaking from awareness, speaking to a certain, in a way, topic. It doesn't have a clear topic, but my teacher would say, if you feel stuck, you can always kind of focus in the direction of, what I'm learning is, or what I've noticed is, or what's going on with me is. And that would often open up a heartfelt, inspiring talk. But what I find really special about satsang is this sense that you are kind of tapping into something that our normal way of communication does not tap into. It's very unusual to listen to somebody for more than 30 seconds. I think I've just hit like 40 seconds. I'm starting to think I better let you talk, But when you allow one person to talk for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes uninterrupted, it's a whole different experience because you can, as an audience member, just relax and just listen, because you're not preparing some kind of rebuttal or some kind of witty remark or some kind of any intelligent thing. You can just really relax and take in something, and you can take it in from different parts of yourself. You can take it in from awareness, you can take it in from your heart, you can take it in from your head. It's really a very different experience than the way we normally communicate.
It is, and it really does make a difference how you listen. I find the one way of listening that probably is the least productive is the one where we're analyzing it or figuring it out or trying to decide if it's true or not. And that leads us to kind of mind stuff, cogitation, and analytical, conceptual thinking.
Which is how we almost always listen in daily life. And that's why we're not inspired a lot, because we're listening to agree or disagree or like or dislike. And all of that is best thrown out the window when you are listening in satsang.
That's absolutely right. And as a matter of fact, if you listen from a place of not knowing or of not figuring out, or simply listening from awareness or from your heart or from openness or from the silence in which words appear, then I think they go deeper. They skip over the analytical mind and go into the deeper, truer self.
Yeah. And, I invite people listening to this and other of our podcasts to try that out. The great thing about a podcast is you get to be passive, you get to listen, and you can experiment with, where am I listening to this from? Am I listening for information? Because we do provide information and techniques. But if you listen, say, from your heart, it might be a different experience. If you listen like you're trying to judge whether we know what we're talking about. We all know that experience. We do that all the time during our life. And that's a much less enjoyable experience than when you listen from a place of really appreciating what somebody is talking about.
Yes.
Sometimes we'll meet somebody and we're judgmental, and they might say something really good, but we're already in that judgmental framework, so we kind of dismiss it. And the opposite is true. I remember when I was interviewing the Dalai Lama, I thought everything he said was just mind-blowing. And then when I transcribed the interview, it seemed like, he would say something like, kindness is incredibly important. Well, yeah, it is. But because he was the Dalai Lama saying that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. Whereas if the corner cashier told me that, I'd go, yeah, that's true, and move on. So it really depends upon how you listen as to what you get. So I encourage our listeners to listen from as deep a place as they possibly can, even now, just to see what it's like.
Well, I think that's a wonderful invitation for our listeners that I hope they take us up on. But if the guy at the corner drugstore or a grocery store said to me, kindness is the most important thing in life, I probably would have thought, oh, wow, the universe wanted me to hear that today.
That's true. And it would be nice if the person in the corner, cashier or whatever, did say those things, because we need those reminders. And sometimes, like you said, the surprising statement from somebody has more impact.
Yes.
So I think it would be interesting to say a little bit more of what makes for these inspiring talks and how we can get them in our life. One thing that would happen in the group I was in is anybody could go up to anybody else in the group and say, Joe, could you give me 5 minutes of your best? And what that meant was, you now have 5 minutes to do a monologue in front of me about whatever truth you want to convey. And I will listen for 5 minutes. And during those 5 minutes, I hope you dig deep and something comes through. And that way we would bring these little gems of truth and inspiration more into our life, rather than waiting for the once a week satsang, which was more formal. And I'm wondering if you have played around with anything like that in your life, Brian.
No, I haven't played around with anything like that, partly because I've never been to a satsang or a gathering or a spiritual meeting where they did that. I mean, there's question and answer periods, but as far as talks, mostly it's from the teacher to the group, except for La Kelly, who encourages people to speak from there. And I think that's great, although I find it difficult to do it without planning what I'm going to say. So I think the element of surprise is better, because then you don't know you're going to be called on and you haven't planned to say anything. And then all of a sudden, bang, there you are, talking. Sort of like you asking me a question and me just coming up with an answer.
Yeah, the thing that seemed to make the magic happen is I never knew when I'd be called upon. And generally, I'd be called upon when I least expected it. When I thought I was surely going to be called upon that week, I'd have like a whole lecture in my head as to what I would talk about. I never got called upon. When I when I had absolutely nothing planned and was feeling like I was going through a hard time, I would inevitably be called upon to give a 30-minute satsang. And of course, it would go well because I personally had nothing to say. I was like, I don't have anything, so I'm going to have to dig into the well within and let it speak, let my heart speak, and see what happens. And it used to be rather magical a lot of the time because, I would somehow manage to be coherent and funny and say important things, and I would learn as much as anybody else in the audience. It was bordering on channeling at times. Mm-hmm. And I found that it was actually one of the most magical techniques or experiences I'd ever had. And yet it was so simple. And I was always wondering, like, what's the ingredient that's making this magic? I mean, it starts with the intention, but it seems like when there's one person speaking, a lot of people hungry for truth and hungry to be fed in this way, something happens. I mean, I think it's just like a law of the universe or a law of the heart that this magic occurs in those types of formats.
I think something does happen when people are getting together in the same place. And they're not necessarily there to enforce their own agenda or convince somebody of anything, but they're being open and receptive. Something happens in the room. People start vibrating at the same frequency. And I think that's a big part of it. And I think the other part of it is we're allowing what we say to come from a deeper place, a more open place, a universal place. And this is where inspiration comes from. This is where artistic creation comes from. This is where creativity comes from. But we often think it's coming from us, our personality, our minds, our egos. And in satsang, we're encouraged to ignore or drop or focus on something else other than our ego, which isn't always easy to do. But when we do, there's an openness and there's a direct communication that can happen.
Yeah. I've been to one or two Quaker meetings. Have you ever been to a Quaker meeting, Brian?
No, I haven't.
They kind of have this technique. I don't know what they call it. I've only been to, I think, 2 in the last 30 years, where anybody in the audience can stand up and give a spontaneous talk. So there's no hierarchy. And they might talk for 5 seconds or they might talk for 10 minutes. And it's a risky thing to do in a congregation. You might have 100 people. I always respected it because they're basically saying, if you feel inspired, talk. And sometimes it's gone phenomenally well. Well, I haven't seen many of them. And sometimes, if one person is just talking a lot from their head, it's not as good. But it's really an example of using this technique in an American way or in a non-Eastern path that has gone on for a couple 100 years.
Fascinating. I'd love to witness that.
Just find I think it's called the Society of Friends. And
we have one near us in the East Village. I actually did go to a memorial service that was held at the Quaker Meeting House, but it was a pretty eclectic affair. I mean, there were Buddhist chanters, so it wasn't really the pure form.
But I think the best way to get a sense of this is that you play with it and explore it for yourself, because there's no fixed rules other than there's a speaker and then there's an audience, and it's not a back and forth. And to see if you can make it part of your life. The way we learn really is we explore, we try stuff, and we see what seems to work for us. My wife and I have sometimes done it where I'll say, "You give me 5 minutes of your best," and it's a great experience really for both people. For the person talking, they get to see if they can tap into something juicy, and for the person listening, they get to be fully passive and fully receptive. So I encourage our listeners to try it in mini satsangs. It might be a 2-minute satsang. It might be a 10-minute one. I know when I've gone camping with friends, we have usually at the end of the camping trip said, let's do a satsang. And we put one chair in front of everybody else, folding camping chair, and the 5 or 6 or 7, whatever friends are in the audience. And I say, whoever feels drawn to talk, go up in the chair and talk until you feel like you've said what you need to say. And it's always beautiful. It's, we have these very rich inner lives with lots going on, and, so much is happening in the world now, and so much is happening internally. To just really listen to someone and really explore in yourself what's going on is one of the greatest gifts you can give yourself or your friends.
I think that's a great idea to try and play around with that. Also, I'd love to find out if there's a group near me that does that in a satsang or another kind of spiritual meeting or group. As a matter of fact, if any of our listeners know of one in the New York area, leave a message on our website, awarenessexplorers.com. I'd be interested in checking it out.
I would even encourage, this is a little self-serving, but I would encourage people to share with their friends and family what they are getting from listening to these podcasts. That could be a starting point. I'm listening to these podcasts and it's really interesting. I'm getting this, that, the other thing. Mm-hmm. And when you put words towards things like the self and awareness and what you're learning and tapping into the wellspring of peace within, it's like putting weight on a balance. Modern day life is all about busyness and getting things done and all that stuff, making money. But we need a balance of words that are just focused on truth, our experience, our desire for peace, because that helps to move us in that direction and potentially move people we care about in that direction, because most people are not getting those words of inspiration except for maybe once a week at church or synagogue. And we need to infuse our daily life with little moments of inspiration and truth. And pointing words in that direction, talking about these things, is certainly a powerful way of doing that.
Yes. And I would say if you want to try this at home, you want to make sure that you're not, for example, let's say you're talking about what you learned from the podcast. If it's an exercise in remembering something and explaining something, then it's not really coming from that clear, open, pure background of awareness. But if you just use that as a launching pad, as something to start talking about, and then shift your attention from the content to the pure, open, clear, allowing background of awareness, and talk from there. That's really what we're talking about. We're not really talking about information, and we're not talking about convincing anybody of anything, and we're not talking about complaining about our lives or the world. We're just talking about, can we speak from emptiness, from the background, from the clear field.
I'm really glad you said that, Brian, because that's quite true. And I do think that to some extent it's a learned skill that gets better with practice. And it's not that you get better. What happens is you get better at having faith that when you let go of your agenda, that something will come through. And so you become less nervous about what am I going to say? And you just are very present with yourself and your body, and something bubbles up and you let those words speak. And it's really a magical thing. So I hope our listeners try exploring this, whether they've tried it before or not, and see if they can tap into this magic, because it's not levitation, but it kind of feels like that sometimes when you really tap in and you think, well, I didn't know that was so accessible. I didn't know that was so easy. I didn't know it could be so uplifting. But a lot of times it really takes you by surprise.
Well, that's a great piece of wisdom, actually, that can apply to so many things in life. I forgot the exact words you said. You said, when you let go of your own agenda, something comes forth. Is that what you said? What was the second part of that?
That something bubbles forth if you're just present with your experience.
When you let go of your own agenda, something bubbles forth if you're just present with your own experience. Yeah. That can apply not just to talking, but it can apply to almost everything in life.
Quite true. Quite true. And this is like a mini practice session of letting that happen. You first do it in a little bit of a structured way, like I'm going to talk for 5 minutes. And then you find that those moments of letting go of your agenda and just being with the background of awareness, or being with yourself or your heart, start to shine through in your life in little moments. And those are the moments that when we look back, we say, yeah, that was a good day.
Yep. There are a couple of other topics around satsang that I wanted to talk about based on my experience of it.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is silence. So the first one I ever went to was given by Pamela Wilson, a wonderful teacher who used to come to New York quite often. And whenever she was in town, I would go and listen. And she would have several minutes, maybe 10 or 15 minutes of silence at the beginning. And it was held in a meeting room at Sufi Books down in Tribeca. And the door to the street led right into the room where we were all sitting. And latecomers would come in and rustle their coats and their bags and adjust their chairs. And I was a novice, and I thought I was told to sit in silence. So I would become annoyed at people who would actually make physical noise. And I thought, well, this isn't silence. This is just, we're just sitting here listening to a lot of people rustling their coats and chairs. And after a while, that sort of dropped away. As a matter of fact, I remember one time I just laughed so much because I thought, oh, it's not about enforcing quiet. It's about realizing that there is a silence already there inside of us in which noise is appearing. I know it's kind of counterintuitive and it may not make sense on a logical level, but silence isn't something you create. Silence is something that's already there. And sounds appear within the field of silence. And when you focus on that, that's when peace and happiness and joy bubble up.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a great lesson for how you can kind of listen for satsang in life, because there's a lot of silence in life.
Right. Silence actually travels with you wherever you go. And even the traffic noises on the street are appearing in silence. Of course, it's difficult to notice that place in the midst of a crowded city. So you practice in easy places, maybe in your apartment or your house, where you just hear the sounds of birds or of wind or rain or the hum of the air conditioner and not much else, so that you can notice the silence much more easily. And then notice, what did that bird sound appear in? Or what does the hum of that air conditioner appear in?
I love that technique. And I think you were going to lead us in a guided meditation around these ideas and and approaches.
I
Is
am.
now a good time for that?
Well, there's one other topic about satsang I wanted to bring up briefly. And one is that I've been to a lot of teachers, and most of them are specialists in what we sometimes call non-duality. And Pamela Wilson being the first one, and many other people from Stuart Schwartz to Neelam to Rupert Spira to Locke Kelly and Adyashanti. And there's one thing that happens. There's really a lot of humor. It's not so serious. I mean, sometimes someone will bring up something serious in their life, and there's a time to talk seriously about deep issues. But a lightheartedness often comes over the group, and there's a lot of laughter. As a matter of fact, at one of the satsangs by Pamela Wilson I went to, she said, "Thank you for coming to satsang. I hope you enjoyed my sit-down comedy." Because everyone was laughing all the time at whatever she said. And she wasn't trying to be funny. It just came out that way. So we're making it sound like some woo-woo spiritual thing where you have to all talk in hushed tones and things like that. And that's definitely not it.
That's a very good point, because it's very in the moment, it's very spontaneous. And sometimes what's up is everything sounds funny and ludicrous. And sometimes it is different than that, but there is no, this is how it looks, because it's very much alive.
Right. And as for the guided meditation, when I first started going to satsang, it was all based in, most of them that I went to were based on some form of a technique which is known as self-inquiry, which could be described as asking, who am I? Or what am I? Or what is this appearing in? And the idea is to shift your attention from the content of awareness or the aspects of the personality or the ego to what is the I that's noticing all this? I like to think of it as the big I in which the little me appears. So I have my version of self-inquiry, and it's called the I of my game. So I'd love to run you through that.
Sounds great.
So first, as in all awareness methods or games, take a deep breath and notice if there's any tension or clutching in your body, and see if you can let that go. And just for the duration of this meditation, see if you can allow whatever is appearing in awareness to be just as it is, and let go of any agenda to fix anything or make anything happen. Now, when we talk about parts of our bodies, we say things like, my arm hurts, my fingers are cold, my foot is asleep, my head aches. We even talk about my body. We know what we're referring to when we say arm, fingers, foot, head, and even body. But what does my refer to? Who is the me or I behind the my? If we answer my body, who is this me who has a body? If we answer my mind, who is this me who has a mind? Let's try this with various parts of your body, and then we'll try it with anything you could possibly conceive of as I or me. Think my hand. Then ask yourself, who has a hand? Who is this me who has a hand? What is the I that my refers to? Think my face. Then ask yourself, who has a face? Who is this me who has a face? What is the I that my refers to? Think my head. Who has a head? Who is this me who has a head? What is the I that my refers to? Think my eyes. Who has eyes? Who is this me who has eyes? Who is the eye of my eyes? My name. Who has a name? Who is this me who has a name? My personality. Who has a personality? Who is this me who has a personality? My body. Who has a body? Who is this me who has a body? Who is the I of my body? My mind. Who has a mind? Who is this me who has a mind? Who or what is the I of my mind? My ego. Who has an ego? Who is this me who has an ego? Who or what is the I behind my ego? When you ask the questions, you're not looking for a logical or factual answer. You're not looking for an object or a thing. Rather, you're trying to feel into the sense of the ultimate I to which all objects, all things, and all experiences appear. Most people's strongest felt sense of who they ultimately are is one of these: my body, my mind, my ego, my name, or my personality. So pick the one you most strongly feel is you and fill in the blank. Think, my blank. Who has a blank? Who is this me who has a blank? When you say my blank, who is the I of my blank? Take a minute to repeat this several times. You might even pause the playback for a bit and repeat it for as long as you like, or until you feel a shift in the felt sense of I. The idea is to turn your attention around from what you're looking at to what's looking. What's looking is not any of these things I mentioned. These are objects and are therefore seen by something else. But what's looking is not an object. What's looking is pure awareness, the background of all experience, the I of my. And this is where happiness, peace, and joy live, in the clear, choiceless, loving ground of being, which is already here, already accepting, just waiting to be noticed. Noticed by what? By itself. The unconditional love of pure awareness. In other words, by you.
Thank you for that, Brian.
You're very welcome, Jonathan.
I think that was quite effective and certainly worked for me. So sometimes hard to talk after we go through one of those meditations.
I know the feeling.
Anything else we should talk about?
No, I think that we actually don't need to talk more, except to say thank you, everybody, for listening.
And of course, as always, keep exploring.
Keep exploring. Thank you for listening to Awareness Explorers. To learn more, you can check out our website at awarenessexplorers.com. Please subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Google Play, or your favorite podcast app. And we'd love it if you would post a review. And please share our link on Facebook and with family and friends, because knowing yourself as awareness is the greatest gift you can give yourself or someone you love.